At 8:32 a.m., the alarm at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson is still blaring when the lead F-22 Raptor tears off the runway and surges into a brutal 9G vertical climb, ripping through the quiet of the Alaskan morning. There is no room for a gradual start. Just 400 meters out, two Russian Tu-95 Bear H strategic bombers, escorted by a pair of Su-35 Flanker E heavy fighters, are already moving across the boundary of the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone. These aircraft are built to carry long-range cruise weapons designed to fly low, stay hard to detect, and reach deep into U.S. territory. American pilots push their engines to the limit, sprinting to intercept the formation before it can reach a possible launch position. What unfolds is a fast-moving, high-pressure confrontation between two global powers on the edge of the world. But the confrontation had started more than an hour earlier, far beneath the cloud layer. At 7:15 a.m., the USS Hopper, a 9,000-ton Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, was cutting through 10-foot Arctic swells in the Gulf of Alaska. The ship was not simply on patrol. It was operating as a forward sensor hunter. Its Spy-1D phased array radar, the core of the Aegis combat system, was already cutting through Russian electronic interference. The Hopper detected the bombers while they were still over international waters, locking in their exact altitude and speed. Rather than sitting back and monitoring, the crew immediately pushed that information through Link 16, a secure tactical network that works like a high-speed battlefield data system. By 7:45 a.m., the Aegis system had already passed along a fire control quality track to NORAD headquarters. That gave U.S. forces a 90-minute advantage to begin shaping their response. The USS Hopper was not merely watching the Russian aircraft, it was boxing them in, working with Space Force satellites to make sure the Tu-95 bombers could not disappear behind the curve of the Earth. Inside the ship's Combat Information Center, sailors were already running simulations for SM-6 intercepts, calculating exactly where they would engage any incoming cruise weapons if the bomb bays ever opened. By 9 a.m., the skies above the Bering Strait had turned into a full tactical chessboard. An E-3 Sentry AWACS swept overhead at 30,000 feet, its rotating APY-2 radar dome scanning the airspace like a giant spotlight in the dark. The aircraft was not just observing the situation, it was actively guiding the F-22 Raptors into a stealthy pincer approach. The Tu-95 Bear H bombers were anything but quiet. Their Kuznetsov NK-12 turboprop engines produced such a powerful acoustic signature that even the U.S. Navy's underwater SOSUS arrays could pick them up through the water. The Su-35 Flanker E escorts, however, are trying to outsmart the Americans, relying on their Urbis E passive sensing capability to search for the U.S. fighters without giving away too much of their own position. The F-22 Raptors answer with complete electronic discipline. At 9:12 a.m., the lead Raptor pilot rolls into a split S, dropping out of the sun to remain buried inside the Russian fighters' blind zones. He still is not using his own radar. Instead, he is taking in a live stream of targeting data from the AWACS and the USS Hopper, fed directly into his helmet cueing system. The American fighters are working with their AN/APG-77 AESA radar in a low probability of intercept mode, shifting frequencies so quickly that Russian sensors read it as little more than background noise. The Russian pilots keep searching the horizon for a contact they cannot find, unaware that the F-22s are already positioned high behind them at their 6 o'clock. At 9:15 a.m., the American pilots switch their master arms to hot. They already hold a digital lock on all 4 Russian aircraft. At the same time, the F-22's AN/ALR-94 electronic warfare suite is silently profiling the Russian jets, logging their radar signatures for future encounters. The Russian formation is flying straight into a layered trap, where every move is being matched by a networked system they cannot even detect. The first real shock hits the Russian pilots at 9:20 a.m. There is no warning from their electronic warfare systems. No alert, no clear sign of danger. Then suddenly 2 F-22s appear almost on their wingtips. The American fighters did not simply close the distance. Their low observability let them slip into visual range before the Russians ever realized they were there. The Raptors then perform a slow, high angle of attack maneuver using thrust vectoring control to settle effortlessly alongside the turboprop bombers. The message is unmistakable. We have been here the whole time, and you never knew. Every American fighter is fully armed for an engagement they believe they control. Each F-22 carries 6 AIM-120D AMRAAM missiles tucked inside internal weapons bays to preserve its stealth profile. Those missiles can reach targets from well beyond visual range and guide themselves with active radar in the final phase. For close combat, each jet also carries 2 AIM-9X Sidewinders. The AIM-9X is a high off-bore sight missile, which means the pilot can engage a target simply by looking at it through the helmet visor, even if the aircraft itself is pointed elsewhere. By 9:35 a.m., the Su-35 pilots try to turn up the pressure, banking toward the Americans in an effort to force a reaction. The Raptor pilots stay completely composed. They use the F-22's exceptional maneuverability to remain locked in the Russians' 6 o'clock position, the most dangerous place a fighter can be in air combat. It is the kind of position from which control of the encounter is no longer in doubt. The Su-35 may be equipped with Saturn AL-41F1S engines and 3D thrust vectoring capability, but with external fuel tanks and R-77 missiles hanging outside the airframe, much of that agility is compromised. The F-22, by contrast, keeps its weapons tucked inside, giving it the clean, razor-sharp profile of a purpose-built interceptor. The American pilots stay composed, communicating through secure systems with almost effortless precision. What makes the moment so striking is not chaos, but control, an expensive Russian formation being boxed into a tactical corner by 2 pilots who never appear under pressure. While this tense aerial encounter continues overhead, the U.S. Navy is building a second layer of protection from the surface. At 9:45 a.m., the USS Hopper and the USS Kidd have their Mark 41 vertical launch systems standing ready. Each destroyer represents a highly refined example of multi-domain defense, prepared to respond the instant the situation changes. If the Russian bombers had attempted to release a KH-101 cruise missile, both ships were ready to answer with the SM-6 interceptor. The SM-6 is built to engage a wide range of threats, from low-flying cruise missiles to ballistic targets in their final phase of flight. Thanks to cooperative engagement capability, the Hopper would not even need to rely solely on its own radar picture. It could launch an SM-6 using targeting data provided by the AWACS aircraft, allowing it to engage an incoming missile well before the ship's own sensors had a direct line of sight over the horizon. That level of integration turns separate platforms into a single, unified defense network. Beneath the surface, another layer of security is already in motion. At 9:50 a.m., a P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft is circling roughly 50 miles away, having deployed a pattern of SSQ-53G sonobuoys to make sure no Russian submarine is using the aerial standoff as cover for a separate move underwater. Armed with Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes, the Poseidon is also sweeping the surface with its AN/APY-10 radar, searching for any sign of periscopes or unusual activity. The Russian force is not just facing a pair of advanced fighters. It is confronting a tightly connected wall of American surveillance and response, extending from the ocean floor to the upper atmosphere. The coordination is so seamless that the P-8A's acoustic picture is being shared with the USS Hopper, and the Hopper is feeding that broader tactical picture back into the F-22's overhead. Every element is reinforcing the others. Nothing is isolated. Nothing is left to chance. By 10:15 a.m., American staying power becomes just as important as speed or positioning. A KC-135 Stratotanker meets the F-22S over the Beaufort Sea for mid-air refueling, extending their time on station and allowing them to remain exactly where they are needed. Backing it up is the KC-46 Pegasus, making sure the chain of support stays intact. The Raptors can remain in the sky for as long as the mission demands. The cost of keeping an F-22 airborne is steep, but the value of the operation is impossible to miss. For a relatively limited operational cost, the U.S. military has used a coordinated air, sea, and undersea response to shut down a potential strategic threat before it could move any closer. When you look at the economics of power, the imbalance becomes even more striking. For the cost of a relatively modest real estate project, the United States demonstrated how quickly a high-end strategic threat can be contained and turned back without escalation. In the process, key infrastructure across Alaska remained protected, including oil pipelines, the port of Anchorage, and critical maritime routes that support billions in annual trade. The Russian Tu-95s, expensive to operate and maintain over time, were unable to complete any meaningful objective and ultimately withdrew before reaching a launch posture. The weapons they were designed to carry never transitioned from theory to reality. Beyond the tactical picture, the message is also economic and strategic. It signals to global markets that Arctic sea lanes remain stable and that critical U.S. energy infrastructure is not easily pressured. At 10:20 a.m., the precision involved in aerial refueling becomes a clear example of the human factor inside a highly automated system. The KC-46 Pegasus boom operator guides the refueling arm with near-millimeter accuracy while the aircraft move through unstable Arctic air. This allows the F-22 pilots to remain focused on surveillance and coordination, even while taking on fuel mid-mission. It is a coordinated procedure that requires discipline and timing, especially in a dynamic operational environment. By 10:45 a.m., the Russian bombers begin turning west toward the Russian Far East. The F-22s maintain escort until the formation is well outside the air defense identification zone, ensuring no unexpected movements or late course changes occur. Even as the aircraft depart, tracking does not stop. AWACS and the USS Hopper continue monitoring the group for hundreds of miles after separation. The network system remains active, extending situational awareness far beyond the immediate engagement. At the same time, the USS Hopper's AN/SLQ-32V 6 electronic warfare suite continues quietly collecting and analyzing the radar and communication emissions from the Su-35 escorts. This process is known as electronic fingerprinting. Every radar system emits subtle characteristics, pulse timing, frequency behavior, and power patterns that can be cataloged and compared. By 10:55 a.m., that data has been captured and stored for intelligence analysis. The real long-term value is not just in the interception itself, but in what is learned from it. Those signatures are fed into centralized Navy intelligence systems, where they help refine electronic warfare libraries and improve countermeasure effectiveness across the fleet. In that sense, the encounter does not end when the aircraft leave the area. It continues in the form of data, analysis, and preparation for future scenarios. By 11:30 a.m., the F-22s are back on the ground at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. The mission is complete, but the processing phase is only beginning. The system has not only responded in real time, it has also absorbed information that will shape how similar situations are handled in the future. The Arctic has become a tightly monitored operational space where the speed of information matters more than anything else. NORAD and the U.S. Navy have shown that even in one of the most remote regions on Earth, integrated sensors and communications can build a continuous situational picture that makes surprise extremely difficult to achieve. In this environment, the most important advantage is not just range or firepower, but awareness. What stands out most is the human role inside this system. The F-22 pilot is not simply flying the aircraft in isolation, he is managing streams of real-time data while operating a highly advanced platform that rivals large-scale computing systems in processing capability. All of this happens while enduring intense physical stress inside a cockpit exposed to extreme conditions. On the maritime side, the sailors aboard the USS Hopper maintain the same level of precision and discipline, ensuring that every piece of information is verified, shared, and acted on without delay. Together, this coordination reflects how modern operations depend on both technology and training working as a single structure. The result is a layered awareness network that leaves very little room for uncertainty once tracking is established. As the Russian formation returns toward its own territory, they are faced with the reality that their movement was continuously observed and interpreted within a broader system they could not directly perceive. From the American perspective, the takeaway is not just about a single encounter. It reinforces the idea that integrated air, sea, and space-based systems can respond quickly enough to shape the entire timeline of an event. Once a track is established, the system expands around it, continuously refining its picture until the situation resolves. Now, stepping into your position as the Tactical Action Officer aboard the USS Hopper at 9:30 a.m., the SPY-1D radar still holds a firm track on the Russian bomber formation. The picture is stable, but your sonar team suddenly reports something unexpected. A fast-moving underwater contact estimated around 40 miles per hour, with characteristics that suggest a large submarine possibly operating at speed. The assessment is still uncertain. It could be a false classification, a non-military contact, or a high-speed submarine transit using the situation overhead as cover. At this point, the priority is confirmation, cross-referencing sonar data, checking for corroboration from nearby assets, and updating the broader maritime picture before any conclusions are drawn. The situation is no longer just about the air picture above. It now requires attention to the underwater domain as well, where clarity is often harder to achieve and every data point matters. The Russian Tu-95s and Su-35s encountered what is best understood as a fully integrated system of systems, one designed to close gaps before they can be exploited. In that environment, coordinated air, sea, and space-based sensing leaves very little room for uncertainty once a track is established. The result is a layered defensive posture that is built less on single platforms and more on continuous connectivity across domains. From that perspective, U.S. military strength in the Arctic is rooted in persistent awareness and rapid information sharing, ensuring that the northern approaches remain closely monitored and controlled. The emphasis is not on a single moment of advantage, but on maintaining consistent situational dominance through integration, timing, and coordination across multiple assets operating as one network. For viewers interested in more detailed breakdowns like this, we continue exploring how modern military systems function as interconnected networks rather than isolated units, and how data, sensors, and communication shape outcomes as much as platforms themselves. The scenario shown in this video is based on publicly known military capabilities, including US and Russian aircraft, naval systems, and early warning infrastructure. However, the specific sequence of events and tactical interactions are presented as a simplified and dramatized reconstruction intended to illustrate how these systems might operate in principle. Until next time, stay alert and keep watching the horizon.